Today I want to speak to an issue that is very prevalent early on in recovery, especially for the unfaithful spouse trying to move past the guilt and the shame of what you've done. And I think it will have some application to the betrayed spouse. And it centers on how we move forward. How do we gain ground when life just hurts? How do we move forward, even if it's incrementally, when we are suffering, when the thoughts are too much, the pain is too much, the reminders, the triggers, the emotional flooding, the self-hatred, the shame, the overwhelming feeling of condemnation? How do you make it through that, and what should it look like early on in recovery? So I want to make 3 observations. I want to tie it all together. I want to try and make it as applicable to your story and where you're at as I can, although everybody's story is different, every situation is different, but I do hope that there's some universal truths in what I share with you that will encourage both the betrayed as well as the unfaithful. The first time that I experienced what one of you betrayed spouses labeled a soul-shredding moment that so many of you encounter is that I was on a sales call with my broker and a client. We hit it off. I was trying to really close this deal. There was a lot of money at stake. My broker was very impressed with the ability for me to build rapport with the client. Everything went great. We thought it was just I thought it was in the bag. The next day, the client calls and says, hey, I had a really good time talking with you. I'd like to meet with you, just you alone, and sit down with you at Starbucks. The self-absorbed, still a little bit prideful guy sometimes was like, yeah, all right, he doesn't even need the broker, he just wants to meet with me. So we sit down, and this was one of the most soul-shredding moments, as one of you betrayed spouses have labeled these moments ever. He basically said, look, I've done some research on you. I read about your affair, and, what do you have to share on that? And it was one of the most embarrassing, humiliating moments ever. Notice I said one of. And it fell apart in my hands. I mean, he basically said, I could never do business with someone like you. I could never work with you. And so you're going to need to go and tell your broker. And I went and told my broker and actually cried like a baby in my broker's office. And this all fell apart. This was probably about a year in. So I think in many ways, we experience these significant moments. For me, I flinched, I was humiliated, and I circled the drain. And early on, it's very common for an unfaithful spouse when somebody brings up your past or you have an experience that reminds you of what you've done or what you're capable of or how you've completely betrayed your spouse's trust and how you've made one of the biggest mistakes, if not the biggest mistake of your life. Man, you circle the drain in shame, in embarrassment. I know for a good week, I was so angry at myself. I was so bitter at myself. I just was crushed. Now, the second experience, I was far different. The second experience, I was at a party with a bunch of baseball dads. There was some alcohol involved. And we were playing ping pong, and it was getting competitive, and guys had more and more to drink. And then in kind of the heat of the moment, I beat this guy, and he was a difficult individual, and he decided to say some really inappropriate things because he had read about me and felt very insecure and decided he was going to tear me down in front of all these people and basically blurt out about my infidelities and all these things. And in that moment, the funny thing was I didn't crash and burn. I didn't circle the drain. I didn't get incredibly embarrassed and humiliated. I was more surreal. I will share about the third story in a minute, but this moment I wasn't circling the drain, but I wasn't like fighting back and kind of like secure and strong. My recovery protocol wasn't really, but I was like, well, it's unfortunate that you had to do that. I'm sure alcohol played a part. I mean, it was really bad. The next day, 2 or 3 of the baseball dads both called me, emailed me, and said, look, we're incredibly sorry. we know you as a great guy. I mean, we don't have anything about all that, and we don't believe what the internet says. And man, we're sorry that he acted like such a fool. The guy never apologized. But I'll tell you, I didn't circle the drain. I just was like, ooh, well, and I'll never forget, a buddy of mine was like, man, that had to be humiliating. And I said, I put myself here. I should have never done what I did. Not everything that's out there is true, but, it is what it is. And he was like, wow, I would never be able to respond like that. And I'm not tooting my horn. I really wasn't in a great place, but yet I wasn't circling the drain anymore. And I think that's like many of us along the road to recovery. Now, part 3 was I was volunteering to be a small group leader in our church that we were going to at the time. This was Samantha's idea, a little jab to Samantha, and I said, I'll do it. Okay. And it was going to be mostly with people that we knew. So I was going through the formality. You can understand, someone that had been a pastor and leading a church was now just volunteering to do a small group, and it was very small and incremental. And I met this gentleman, and he interviewed me. And if Rick's taught me anything about working with pastors or in churches, he's told me, look, you better always do full disclosure and let people know just who you are and your background. And I thought, hey, I'm going to do that. And so I told him, yeah. At this point, it was actually like around 9 or 10 years later. And I said, well, I had an affair, and I thought it would be great encouragement to this guy. Like, I thought it would be like, man, he's going to really feel encouraged at faith and hope in what God has done. So I tell him my story, and within a heartbeat, his countenance changes. And he's like, oh, really, you did? And I said, well, yeah, we've seen our marriage restored and going on, close to 20 years, and we're doing great. And oh, by the way, your senior pastor is best friends with Rick Reynolds, who is my therapist, and he'll be happy to vouch for me. And if you need any other references, I'm happy to. I know that this is just a little small group, but I'm happy to provide references. And he probably responded almost as bad as story 1 that I gave you. Now, at this point, I was further down the road in my recovery, and I simply was like, wow, I guess that didn't sit well with him. So I thought about it for a couple days. And then he met with me again, kind of put me through the ringer again. I was super uncomfortable. And at that point, I felt like God said, we're not going to do this. You don't need to do this. And so a long course of events transpired, and basically one of the other pastors reached out and said, man, I'd like to talk with you. And I said, well, here's what went on. And I'm just going to tell you, I was gracious, but I was very matter of fact, and I gave him the whole details, and I felt really like I needed to do it, because what about the guy that was very early on in recovery being put through the ringer, right? I felt like I had to kind of protect other people that might come his way. And I was very gracious, but I was very matter of fact, and I said, I'm just going to tell you, if I wasn't as far along in my recovery, I would have felt shamed and humiliated and embarrassed and really handled, unfortunately, just a wrong way. Like, that's bad. I mean, I even told him that, his senior pastor was best friends with Rick. Like, they know each other. Like, this is awkward. And all I got back was, you are exactly right. Please accept our deepest apologies, and blah, blah. It's not important. What's important is helping you understand that early on you might flinch and feel unfaithful or betrayed. And as you gain some ground, there is going to be this moment where you're like, oh, this hurts, but you know what? I'm kind of numb, I'm kind of surreal, I'm not where I used to be, and I'm not where I want to get, but I'm okay. And then there's going to be a point where you say, look, pal, I have slugged it out for days, weeks, months, even years. I have been hacking away at the forest of self-hatred and pain and hurt. And a lot of you ask me, like, how did you get through it? Or how are we going to get down the road? You're going to get down the road by going through all the different stages of processing, of yelling, of raging, of sitting in the fetal position, being full of despair and hurt and struggling. But the fact is that you keep moving. You are hacking away at the jungle of all the internal dialogue and the internal hatred and the internal confusion and all the stuff that you're working on. But you're going to get to that fresh field, if you will, of freedom, of healing, of fresh water. But you're going to have to hack away at it. You're going to have to work your recovery protocol where you'll get to the point that somebody may bring up your past or somebody may talk about your past, and you're going to be able to go, yeah, but you know what? We're doing great, or I'm doing great, and I'm in a healthy place. And I have seen, if you come from faith, you'll say, man, God's done all these different things. If you don't come from faith, you'll be able to go, man, I am in such a better place. I am healthy, I'm strong, I am whole. I don't live in this incredible point of confusion and uncertainty. I have found healing, and I am in a great place. So if you're in step one or story one, it's okay. Keep hacking away. If you're at story two, it's okay to feel surreal. You're not where you used to be, and you're not necessarily where you want to be yet. And if you're in, hopefully, stage three, you're able to say, yeah, you know what, I did that, or yeah, that happened to me. And like Samantha, who you may have seen, you're in a great place. So don't give up and don't quit. Remember, what you tolerate, you applaud, you encourage, and you allow. Maybe you need to stop tolerating some things internally. Maybe you need to stop tolerating some things that are being done to you.